All right, guys, Mercier. And today we're going to talk about the controversy that are Glock pistols. We're going to talk about Glock haters as well as Glock hate in general. We're going to describe different groups and all that type of stuff and really get into the nitty gritty on... It's not so much just a conversation about Glocks, but also, in my opinion, a conversation about equipment in general. If I were to put this into very broad strokes, we're primarily focusing on Glocks. This is not necessarily a conversation that is going to be as informative as, say, like my cartridge discussion videos and all that kind of stuff, as much as this is a very opinion-based video. This is based off of my observations. This is based off of how it is that I evaluate information and what I think about different products and stuff in the firearms community. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more informative, you probably want to check out some of my other content, and I will put links to some of that content in this video if you want to stick around for that for a little bit. But this is much more of a discussion than it is necessarily a informative video. Now with this, we need to go ahead and get some kind of like some things identified, some caveats, some over-encompassing ideas noted. So first off, guys, longtime viewers of the channel know I am a longtime Glock fanboy. I have been a fan of Glock ever since I was like 10 years old. I own a ton of Glocks. I carry Glocks. I take Glocks to courses. I compete with Glocks. I compete with other handguns as well, but I have more Glock handguns than I do any handgun from any other manufacturer. I've reviewed Glocks. I've reviewed other guns from other manufacturers as well, and I own guns from other manufacturers, and those will play different portions in this conversation as we move forward. I do not consider myself Glock myopic, but I do like things that work, be it Glock or be it something else. It doesn't really matter to me. This is if there was one of many ideas that I want to get across in this video is that, first off, it is very important, especially when you make recommendations to people, that you not make your preference their problem. What does that mean? Well, I have things that I like, and I have reasons for why it is that I like things. I also evaluate that there's some other things that I don't like that still might be good. That still might have pros or cons or advantages depending on different situations and all that kind of stuff. And having a social media platform and making recommendations to a wide audience, even if I'm not that big of a channel, I still have a voice that I'm putting out there, and I have to make sure that I take a wide variety of demographics, of price points, of people's individual needs and all that kind of stuff whenever it is that I make recommendations. I have to think not just of myself. I can include my own opinions. I can stress things that I have found to be important in my experience over time and all that kind of stuff, and why it is that I make the decisions that I make as a way to help you develop your own opinions, but I can't necessarily make the decision for you. That is something that I have to keep in mind, and that's something that I also guard very jealously on this channel. That's not something I take lightly, and I do not appreciate it when others do. So I frequently get engaged in conversations on, the pros and cons of Glock or different striker-fired or hammer-fired guns or rifle systems or whatever it is that it may be, and I always make certain that I am being diligent in how it is that I give my answers. And I dislike anytime somebody bashes something that I know to be good. So if somebody comes up and just starts spouting off some crazy stuff about how terrible Glocks are, you're going to most definitely goad me into a conversation at that point. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. However, how it is that you support an opinion in polite society, in educated discussion, is very important, especially if you're trying to make recommendations to somebody. If you cannot get your information across in an appropriate manner, then why is it that anyone should listen to you? They should not. Now, one of the overarching ideas that I kind of want to get in here, in addition to the preference problem type thing, is, and this is actually kind of a two-part thing. We're going to look at the first part of this overall discussion right now, and then we will get later on into the second part, closer to the end when we get closer to conclusions. When Glock first hit American shores in the 1980s, there was absolutely nothing else like it on the market. There was not another polymer frame striker-fired handgun to compete with, especially at its capacity, at its weight, at its capabilities. You're talking about a time when, in comparable pistols to a Glock 17, you would have had the Smith & Wesson Model 5906, you would have had the Beretta Model 92FS, you would have had the SIG P226. Changing that dynamic a little bit, you would have had 1911s chambered in 9mm 38 Super 45 ACP. None of these really managed to be as lightweight as a Glock, as having the same capacity. 17 rounds standard, when you're talking about guns that were the same size and heavier coming in at 15 rounds, you could understand how that's kind of earth-shattering. That's a huge difference. And while the striker fire trigger, especially on the first generation Glocks, wasn't necessarily that great of a trigger, it was a consistent trigger, which puts it at odds with the 5906, the SIG 226, and the Beretta Model 92 FS, which were double action, single action triggers. You had a consistent trigger pull like you would with a 1911, though a 1911 does have a better trigger, I'll grant it that, at twice the capacity. There's a pretty solid advantage right there. If you're talking competition, if you're talking, qualified professional or something along those lines, police, military, all those types of things, you could understand where someone would be like, that's a pretty fantastic combination. I want that in my life. I want that in my holster. I want to depend on my life with that gun and all those types of things. So that's the first thing that I want everyone to keep in mind here, especially when we talk about the weight type aspect of it. When the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge would come out in the mid-90s, a lot of manufacturers would jump on this because police departments had an interest in a higher capacity handgun with a little bit more mass than what you would find in a 9mm. With bullet technology at the time, 9mm was not performing as well as it could, but no one really wanted to go back to 357 Magnums or 45 ACPs right off the bat. 40 Smith & Wesson became this really great compromise, which I actually have a separate video on that. It comes from it was like the second video I ever did on the channel. So if you're interested in that, I'll put a link in the description. Glock maintained their size dynamic. They did not increase the size of their frames or their slides or anything like that for the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge. Now, that's kind of a double-edged sword. Lots of manufacturers found out that the 40 Smith & Wesson is a high-pressure cartridge, and a lot of shooting would crack frames. The Browning High Power was rechambered in 40 Smith & Wesson for a short period of time up until they found that their frames were failing. Glock had a couple of instances of frame failures throughout its history with the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge. I would like to add that those were on very high round count guns, which, when you're talking about production by scale and all that kind of stuff, production by volume and everything like that, you will find malfunctions. You will find breaks. There will be issues eventually, and Glock has taken steps over the years to correct that. But up until the Gen 5s, with the exception of a couple of specialty handguns, like the Glock 20 and 21 have a larger frame than the standard Glock, everything else. The 45 gap Glocks have a very different frame dynamic. The Glock 36 Slimline has a very different frame dynamic than the rest of the handguns in the Glock lineup. The 42, 43, 48, all of these guns are shaped very differently than your Glock 19, a Glock 23, a Glock 33, whatever it is that it may be. Up until the Gen 5s, in which Glock actually had to change their slide dimensions slightly in order to be able to accommodate the 40 Smith & Wesson and now the 45 and 10mm as well. Even so, Glock over the years has consistently been lighter and smaller than everything else on the market, because everyone else builds their gun for a 40 Smith & Wesson frame. Glock never did, and that is why they're always just a little bit lighter, just a little bit smaller. It's fractions of an inch or an ounce, whatever it is that it may be. Plenty of manufacturers get very close to the Glock size weight dynamic, but none are quite there. And that's one of the things that I find truly remarkable about these handguns. It sounds like a conclusion all by itself, but it's not. We're not even getting to the conclusion portion of this yet. Those dynamics are unprecedented for the time that they showed up, and it is amazing that Glock has been able to keep up with it. Really, and even with the slide dimensions change in the Glock Gen 5s, there was some discussion and some conjecture that the Gen 5 was never going to come out in anything but a 9mm because they redesigned the internals of the slide in such a manner that it would wind up precluding accommodating a 40 Smith & Wesson. And instead, Glock did something that they've never done, which was just now start mass producing run-of-the-mill handguns. The Glock 22 is still popular for some police use at a completely different size. Completely different. It's still fractions of an inch, but at a larger overall size. And that means a lot for their production capacity and all that kind of stuff. That was one of the advantages of sticking with more or less the same size of things, because it's less retooling that they have to gear up for every time they bring out a new generation. In the 40 years since Glock showed up on American shores, it has become the premier law enforcement and military handgun across the world. So with all of that, we kind of got into a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but it was important to be able to set the stage more or less for what it is that we're going to talk about as we move forward. So with all of that, Glock has still garnered itself a lot of people who would tell you that it is not good, that they are not this, they're not perfection, as Glock has always claimed it is. In fact, every time Glock comes out with a new generation, you've got somebody sitting there going, well, whatever happened to perfection, as though you're not supposed to update a product catalog somewhere along the way. And we'll get into that more here in a minute. In my opinion, you have three categories of people who dislike Glocks. You have your overpriced, overhyped group. You have your angsty kind of hipstery group. And then you have your wood and steel, like kind of FUD kind of guys. And we'll talk about each one of these in turn. Now, within the overpriced, overhyped group, you have two subgenres. You have your elitist, and then at the other end of the spectrum, you have your poor, for lack of a better term. There's a lot that we have to discuss in the elitist, so I'm going to first start off with the poor. So the poor feels that those guns, feels that Glocks are overpriced and overhyped because there are just as good options available out on the market, be that Springfield Armory XDs or Ruger SR9, SR40s once upon a time, and now, and also the SR45, but now looking probably more like the Ruger Americans, if we're sticking with polymer frame striker-fired handguns, as well as like Taurus G2, G3Cs, whatever it is that you're looking at in those categories. They're looking at guns that, like, when Springfield was really kind of popular and selling a lot of guns, they used to do like package deals where you would get the gun, a holster, magazine pouches, and like 3 mags. And like this whole like little range setup ready to go. However, I would point out that the holster that that gun came with sucked. And the magazine pouches were also terrible. They had Picatinny rails on them for some reason. It didn't make any sense. So they're great to go ahead and just get you to the range, but I would not rely on them for anything that was actually like serious type use. Cool, it'd be a great starter pack to go and shoot your first course or competition or something along those ways, which if that's what gets you into the game, great, fantastic, love it. I'm all about it. However, I would upgrade those options as soon as possible. I would not rely on them, and I would definitely not carry them for self-defense. Now, honestly, guys, when it comes back to the whole idea of like, all I want is you armed, and if your budget precludes you from being able to spend the money on Glocks, and if you bought something cheaper like a Taurus, and then you would have more money for ammunition, that's great, that's fantastic, I love it. However, what I've noticed over the years in attending courses and competitions and all that kind of stuff is that I don't see a lot of people showing up with Tauruses. I see the occasional Ruger SR9. Once upon a time, though, Ruger has discontinued them. I've never seen a Ruger American pistol at a competition or a course, and I seldom see XDs. That's not to say that I don't see them, it's just that I seldom see them. It seems to me that a lot of times when people buy in this price category, they're kind of a casual shooter, and that's okay. Not everybody has to be John Wick. But if you're going to inform somebody else on why it is that you picked the options that you picked, maybe keep that in mind. Because, in my opinion, it's better to recommend things from a position of you are going to be a defensive shooter. Your handgun, a gun, no matter what it is, it's a single shot shotgun, it's a slingshot for crying out loud. Any type of projectile weapon is something that you're potentially figuring into your self-defense strategy. Should the world grow crazy or somebody break into your house in the middle of the night, if all you got is a .22 single action revolver, that's your home defense gun. That is the thing that you're figuring in to be able to defend yourself. So when I make these types of recommendations, I keep that type of stuff in mind. It's the same type of thing whenever it is that we're talking guns. Part of that is training, and I would encourage you to get the training. Something else that I will note is that in addition to never seeing these guns at competition, or seldom seeing these guns at competitions or courses or anything along those lines, and I mean like dedicated courses, not like CCW courses or something along those lines, which are pretty anemic as far as courses are concerned. I'm talking about like dedicated pistol courses. I also never see qualified professionals carrying Tauruses. You might have at one point seen the occasional XD. I think they've all been superseded by Glocks or other comparable striker-fired handguns. And I definitely don't see Ruger SR9s and SR40s or Americans or anything along those lines. These cheaper budget guns Great, you're armed, and that's fantastic, and I hope that you're practicing and all that type of thing, but you don't see these getting used hard. You really don't. And some of that's kind of unfortunate, because actually the Ruger SR9 and SR40 were good guns. They just didn't catch on for some reason. But when you start to play around at these price points and with these types of handguns, you don't have as much aftermarket support as Glock does. And that's one of the things that has kept Glock viable in the shooting sphere, is the fact that whatever it is that you want to get, you can get for a Glock. Whatever modification it is you want to make for a handgun, you can find it for a Glock. And you may not necessarily be able to say that same thing for these other products. I am always very cautious around anybody that tells me something is just as good. It's just like anytime I hear an advertisement and somebody in the advertisement compares their product to another product. I automatically want to know more about that other product. I want to know what the status quo here is. I want to know why it is that we are using that particular product as our measure. And how good of a measure is that? Is this thing actually outperforming it? What's the contextual aspect that makes me compare these two products and decide one is better over the other? And when I hear just as good, that is exactly where my mind goes, and that's exactly what it is that I start looking into. A lot of the times it's like cheaper materials and stuff like that. And there are some materials I'm not willing to cheap out on, like in AR-15s when it comes to barrels. I won't do a 4140, but I'll do a 4150 chrome moly. A lot of your cheaper, just as good rifles don't have a 4150 barrel, but there are quite a few that do, and that is where we start to see the change in that dynamic. It's the same thing with handguns, maybe not necessarily with barrels, but when it comes down to how parts are made and all that kind of stuff, those are the things that you start to pay attention to as to where that price point came from. Oh, that's very rich. Now, from there, let's go ahead and talk about our elitist category. And actually, there are 3 subcategories of elitist, in my opinion. You have your dedicated qualified professional, you have your aesthetic group, and then you have your hubris group. And we're actually going to discuss these in reverse order from how I listed them. Starting off with the hubris group. These are guys that tell you, pretty much all 3 of these guys will tell you that you have to make a ton of modifications to your Glock, and that is why they are overpriced and overhyped. So your elitist group will tell you that you immediately, as soon as you get the gun, you need to go ahead and drop in a trigger, you need to replace the sights, you need to stifle the grip, you need to put a flared magazine well on it, you need compensating, you need porting, you need this, that, and the other thing in order to be able to make this gun good. In order to be able to meet some sort of performance standard from the firearm. I don't necessarily disagree with this, and we'll get into this more here as we move forward, but my question becomes, when you buy a gun and automatically make updates to it, I argue as to whether or not you have put in the trigger time to make those updates. And this is going to be a controversial statement, and I don't really care, because I said what I said. I have met an awful lot of people over the years who attempt to utilize products, accessories, and all that kind of stuff in order to buy performance. And at the end of the day, you can't buy performance. You have to bring in the necessary fundamentals in order to be able to wring the most out of your gun. The vast majority of guns out on the market will outshoot the vast majority of shooters out on the market. They are inherently more accurate than the shooter is itself, because the gun just does what it is that it's told to do. The shooter has to bring all of the skill and all of the capability and all the fundamentals. And there's an awful lot of people who attempt to crutch their way through fundamentals instead of having that tough conversation with themselves that they're not doing the best that they could be, that they are allowing themselves to underperform and blame the object, the inanimate object, for it. Some of it's accurate, some of it's not necessarily true. There's some things that I absolutely do agree that you need to change on a Glock. The sights. The sights are not good. The plastic Glock sights are not good. They should stop that and just come standard with Ameriglows like they do for some of the law enforcement contracts they have out there. But those are really easy to change out. There's a wide aftermarket dedicated to being able to give you better sights for a Glock pistol. That is the only thing, in my opinion, that has to be replaced on a Glock pistol. But even with that, the miracle of Glock is that you can, and honestly, any striker-fired pistol out on the market today, is that you could, most striker-fired pistols out on the market today, there's some caveats there, is that you can go to the store, pick it up, take it to the range, shoot it, and it will function just fine. Everything on the Glock is enough to get anybody to the range. And somebody who has their fundamentals down can adequately defend themselves with a stock Glock. If I put a stock Glock in Jerry Michulik's hands, that gun is going to way outperform my capability with it in his hands. And it's not because he's sitting there shooting his super tricked out, competition pistol or something like that. The man has the fundamentals down. That's how you get to his level. He'll tell you that in numerous interviews and stuff like that. It is not features. It is not products. It is the shooter. You cannot buy performance. So somebody comes up to me and is like, oh, well, Glock triggers suck. I've got to drop in, this flat-faced 2.5 pound trigger in order to be able to get good groups out of it and all that kind of stuff. Is that the case? Does the Glock trigger suck? Or are you bad at getting to the wall? Are you bad at reading your sights and all that kind of stuff and actually having good recoil management to get faster follow-ups? Are you slapping the trigger? Are you doing things that you shouldn't be doing that, yes, a lighter trigger is going to give you better groups, but it's not changing the core problem, and you're really not that much better of a shooter for having done so. One of the things we have to keep in mind about Glocks, at the time that Glocks came out, this piece of advice continues on in the world, don't get me wrong, but it was believed that you had to put like 500 rounds through a brand new gun, a brand new metal framed gun, in order to make sure that all of the tolerances had worked themselves in and all that kind of stuff, and that the gun was going to be reliable for defensive type capabilities. And you needed to shoot X amount, like minimum 200 rounds of your chosen defensive ammunition to make sure that it would be reliable in your carry gun. That is insane to me for two reasons. One, I buy a brand new gun. Okay, I already have to figure in the cost of holsters and magazines, and let's say that it's going to be a duty type gun, and I want a pistol light on it and all that kind of stuff. I have to figure all those things into the price equation. Normally, I wouldn't consider ammunition in the price equation because ammunition is the cost of building proficiency and maintaining proficiency with said firearm. So it's like a different pot of money at that point. Up until you tell me I have to run 500 rounds of it in order to be able to have a reliable handgun, a broken in and reliable handgun. That's ridiculous to me. I need an investment of half a case of ammunition in order to make sure the gun will be reliable. Are you kidding me? That is not a part of just training and proficiency and all that kind of stuff. It kind of rolls into that pot of money, but it's just as much to do with the cost of the gun. You go ahead and add in a case of ammunition as a part of the cost of your gun in order to make sure it's going to be reliable. In addition to that, you then take in that same thought, right? Oh, well, I'm carrying this, whatever, 1911 or STI or something along those lines. It's going to take this many rounds for it to break in. And then you bring in defensive ammunition along with that. Defensive ammunition for a box of 20 or 25 costs as much as a box of 50 FMJs, if not more. That is insane. The additional cost at this point is absolutely insane. Now, being somebody with a YouTube platform, I of course have to give you guys good practices. So absolutely, you should test out your carry ammunition, your duty ammunition with the gun that you're going to use to defend your life. I would suggest, however, that you do it at the end of a range session that you've already been shooting some FMJs. You already ran through 2, 3, however many boxes of FMJ, and you want to go ahead and test this carry ammo. I would have 1, maybe 2 boxes. Go ahead and run it through an already dirty gun. That way you can discern in a not pristine condition whether or not that ammunition is going to run flawlessly. That is my recommendation to you guys. But not to go, do what I say, not what I do. When it comes to myself, my own experiences, the risk that I am willing to accept for me, right? What I'm willing to tell you to do is very different from what I am willing to do because I'm more concerned for you than I am for me. That's an overarching belief on this channel. I am completely comfortable with going down to the store right now, buying a Glock, having to wait my 3-day wait period because the state I'm in now requires that. Going to the store, picking it up after the 3 days, loading the magazine and slapping that thing in a holster and carrying it defensively. I am completely fine with that because Glock and many striker-fired handguns out on the market have proven that they are that reliable over and over and over again. I am 100% willing to accept it. Not willing to recommend it, but I'm willing to accept it. So that's our hubris group, people who are trying to buy performance. And that's why they'll tell you that they don't want to buy Glocks because you have to drop the price of the gun on the gun in order to be able to get it to where it needs to be or where they think that they need to be. And then, that's why they want to buy something else. You then have your aesthetic group, and these are guys who just don't like the look of a Glock, and they want they want grip stipling, they want, the flared mag well, because this is the ownership aspect of it. They want slide cuts, and they want to change the color of the slide and all that type of thing, and this, that, and the other thing. And they want the gun to look cool, to be something that they enjoy looking at. And personalization in firearms is a time-honored tradition. I get it. I actually hold absolutely nothing against this crowd. To me, Glocks are utilitarian. They are tools. And there's a lot of other people who are dedicated users of Glocks who feel that way. That this is just a thing that performs a task. It doesn't have to look good. I don't need a stylish looking shovel. But to somebody else who does want to take pride in their firearm, that might push them to either spend a bunch of money on upgrading a Glock or going after something else that already has the aesthetic that they're after. That's fine. That's a personal preference thing. You do you, boo. Now, of course, you know some of the things that you do to it might look kind of goofy to me or be kind of garish, but all that matters is that you're happy with how it is that you spent your money, and I fully support you. Might judge you from a distance, but I fully support you in whatever it is that you want to do. This is where a lot of people say, well, Glock hasn't really changed the aesthetic of their guns in years, and I get that. I really do. But it doesn't look like Glock has a lot of interest in changing it because there's still interest in the gun in its base form. And if you don't like something about it, you can go ahead and invest in the aftermarket in order to be able to change those things. So yes, Glocks are not flashy, but they were never meant to be. Going from there, we now get into our dedicated qualified professional. This is the group that I aspire to be a part of in general. This is the type of mindset that I want to be a part of. These are guys that take their guns and they take training very seriously. And they make sure that they are being very diligent in how it is that they apply their training. And they spend a lot of time on introspection whenever something goes wrong on a course of fire. And really try to dig into whether or not they were the cause of the problem or if there was something about the gun that was causing them to slow up. So for me, if I mess up a course of fire, if I don't do as well as I wanted to at a competition or something like that, I mess up a drill, I evaluate my shooting footage and all that kind of stuff, which has multiple purposes. I use this shooting footage to put on the Merciful Law Facebook channel or Facebook page, which if you're interested in that, link in the description. That's where I get that's where I post a lot of behind the scenes stuff, bonus content and all that type of thing. So I'm filming for that. I'm filming for the channel, obviously shooting footage for shooting videos. And then also to be able to look back over recordings of what it is that I did and be able to identify where I'm messing things up. That's the first thing. If I mess up a course of fire, I need to exhaustively discern whether I was the issue. Was I slapping the trigger? Was I not reading the sights properly? Did I not have good recoil management? Was I anticipating recoil and all that kind of stuff? Those are the things that I'm looking for. Once I eliminate me, then I start looking about what is it with the gun that's not working for me. And do I need to make a change? So a great example is my Browning High Power Mark III. I've been carrying that gun off and on for 10 years. I've taken it to competitions. I haven't taken it to a course yet, but I've been shooting it for a really long time. Something that I've noticed with that gun is that it has a very long reset. It's like the longest reset of any of the handguns that I own. Sometimes when I'm shooting it, I think I've let that reset out long enough for a reasonable firearm reset, be it my CZP-07 or, the Glocks, whatever it is, whatever other gun I might have been shooting prior to that. I feel like I've let it out far enough and I pull the trigger again to get back on the wall and break that next shot. And all I do is just pull all the way to the rear of the trigger guard because I never let the gun go to reset. So now I've got to throw my finger forward and then get back on the trigger, take up the slack, get on the wall, break the shot. That's stuff that if I do everything right, doesn't necessarily, at most, I'm kicking myself because I didn't let the reset out far enough. But I, at the very least, got back on there, got good hits, got good target engagement and all that type of thing. But what did that cost me in hundredths of a second to go through that entire overall process? So if that is what's making the difference between me, moving up at the competition or something along those lines, or getting the splits that I want, or getting the end time that I want, then that's something that I need to start evaluating. Perhaps I need to upgrade this trigger in some way to have a shorter reset or a lighter trigger break or whatever it is that it may be. Those are the type of things that I'm looking at. Now, I, of course, have zero interest in modifying that Mark III. It's not a serious use gun for me. It's not something that I carry defensively anymore. It can go ahead and remain in the manner that it is, and I'll work around it as best I can. But I could understand somebody shooting a Glock, which is known for having a spongy and kind of stagey trigger pull and all that kind of stuff, and identifying like, man, this is, in order to go through the process of applying my fundamentals, this is slowing me down. If I went to a lighter trigger with shorter travel and reset and all that kind of stuff, I would be able to clean up these splits quite a bit while I still apply my good fundamentals. That's the difference between the Hubris group and our dedicated qualified professionals in this case. Introspection, deliberate self-analysis. That's the huge part here. Also, this is what might drive these guys to then want to spend the amount of money that they would spend modifying a Glock on something else that maybe better fits that category. So that's not like jumping to STI, because you'd have to like completely rebuild a Glock out of like gold in order to be able to get that gun to cost as much as, a Staccato or something along those lines. I keep saying STI. I don't think they're actually a company anymore, but a Staccato or something along those lines. But they might be looking at some of the competition-minded options from like SIG or CZ. So I had a friend here recently who bought a CZ P10F competition ready. Great gun. He absolutely loves it. But here's the thing, when you go away from the Glock formula, which is fine, to each their own, I get that. When you go away from the formula, you have to start evaluating what you might need since you're going away from the aftermarket support of the Glock. So when my friend picked up, when he was looking at the P10F in the gun shop, I got a hold of it, I put my hands on it, and I noticed that my support, or my firing hand thumb, pretty much immediately landed on top of the slide release. And I'm like, hey man, I think you're gonna have an issue with your thumb's forward grip not allowing the slide release to activate, which means that you won't get last shot hold open. I think this is going to mess you up. Well, at that point, he should look into what would be involved in replacing the slide release. If that winds up being true, if his, because his hands are different than mine, maybe it won't be an issue under recoil. But just in case it is, can he get a lower profile slide release? Will the standard CZ P10F slide release fit on the P10 competitions? There's something that's going to change that. Let's say that you're a dude and you're looking, at I don't know, a P10C or something along those lines, and you're like, man, I like this, but I feel like this magwell is going to be an issue. I don't think it's big enough. Maybe you look into whether or not a flared magwell exists. You don't buy it until you get the gun to the range and find out whether or not the flared magwell is needed. But you've already done the research to figure out what it is that you need. So that's more than researching just whether or not lights are going to fit on the gun, or holsters are going to fit on the gun, or anything along those lines, or what options would be available to you. It's also trying to lean into, I'm moving away from a gun with fantastic aftermarket support. What if I need aftermarket support? Is that going to be available, or do I need to look at something else? So that's the kind of thing that you got to think about if you're going to be a part of this group. Because absolutely, at times there are some things about Glocks that are really not that great, and there's some prices out there that really aren't that wonderful. If I didn't have blue label pricing on Glocks, I would be less interested in Glocks. But I get a discount, so I'm pretty happy with that, and that's what it is that I'm looking into at that point. Whenever it is that I evaluate Glocks. All right, so that's our dedicated professional group. Let's go ahead and talk about our angsty hipsters. These are the guys who are like, well, Glocks are really popular, so I don't like them. Which has always struck me as really silly. Like, you know what, sometimes, guys, something is popular because it's good, because it works. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, if you want to be angsty and go after something else, that's cool. But you're going to have to own the portion of this that is being angsty, that is just wanting to be different. You know what, you go ahead and be, a special snowflake, whatever it is that you want to be here. Everyone's an individual, and I get that, and that's completely fine. But it's still a system that works. That's why it's popular. That's why it's used the world over by law enforcement and militaries and all that kind of stuff. They work, all right? Now, this is your group that's going to want to go after more like Walthers or CZP10Cs or HKs, something along those lines. Those are good guns. I'm not the biggest fan of the VP9, just based on my experiences with it thus far. But, you know, you want to talk about the CZs, you want to talk about the Walthers and all that kind of stuff, the old PPQs, the new PDPs. Cool, man. That's great. I love that the PDPs have like really good texturing and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's good. I'm super glad that that's what you're into. But then these guys will also accuse Glock of lacking innovation. But I want to, like, I'm not disagreeing. Like, yeah, their guns look the same. A Gen 1 and the Gen 5 don't look that different. Minus like a couple of things. But I would not consider a lack of innovation in this case to be stagnation, because Glocks are still selling hand over fist. Now, if you want to look at a company like Colt that hasn't been innovative since the SCAR program, and even then didn't necessarily lean into it with the release on the civilian market and all that kind of stuff, because bad timing with assault weapon bans and all that kind of stuff, Colt's stagnant. And Colt's not only stagnant, but not doing well. The newest thing Colt has released is just a rehash of the snake line of revolvers that they redesigned in order to be able to accommodate mass production, instead of having to go with the hand fitting that the original Colt Pythons and King Cobras and all that kind of stuff had to have. And those guns had issue at launch. So that is stagnation. That is a company that's not being innovative, that hasn't done anything that is any interest, and is still riding on the laurels of being Colt, and that's supposed to mean something to me. When it doesn't, when my bottom line of money is not being adequately met with actual innovation, effort, features, anything that actually constitutes my interest in a firearms company. Glock, on the other hand, still raking in contracts hand over fist, still expanding their customer base and all that kind of stuff, with a gun that is quote-unquote stagnated. I don't know if that's necessarily an accurate statement in this case. Would it be really cool if Glock came out with something that looked kind of different? Yes, that would be very interesting. I would love to see Glock diversify their product catalog a little bit. At the same time, I have plenty of other manufacturers I can go to for diverse product catalog. If you're really looking for somebody like trying to push the limits and maybe even reason of innovation, go ahead and look at Keltec. Keltec does not shy away from trying to unveil something weird. Doesn't always work out for them, but they are not shy about trying it. And whatever floats your boat in that case. Not necessarily my thing, but I get it. I get what it is that you're saying in this case. Still not to say that the product's bad, because if the product was bad and they were stagnant, the company would be dying like Colt has been, instead of expanding like Glock is. All right, and then our third group, our kind of FUD group, who only believes in guns that are made out of steel. So a lot of them are still espousing the values of the 1911, or they are diehards, steel-framed, hammer-fired guns in general, be it CZs or SIGs or Berettas or whatever it is that they might be into. These guys are stuck in the 1980s. And they are still mad that Glock showed up on our shores because, well, it's not an American-made gun. I don't care where a gun is made. All I care about is whether or not it works. That is my bottom line. That is where my money goes. I 100% do not care, because those American-made companies, or any of these companies, honestly don't care about me. They're competing with each other trying to put out better products. So my money's going to go where a good product is. It's one of those things, well, Colt. I don't care about Colt. Never have, never will. I'm excited to see Colt hired by CZ, only because I'm hoping that's going to bring some sort of innovation to the company, because we do benefit from companies having innovation and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not holding my breath, because Colt just seems to be willing to die on this stupid hill of not actually innovating. Anyway, that's a little bit of a rabbit hole. Let's get back on track here. These are the guys who will crack jokes like, oh, well, my dog never mistook my gun for a chew toy, and, show a picture of somebody's Glock having been chewed on by their dog. First off, your guns probably shouldn't be accessible to your dogs. Let's go ahead and be like safe gun owners here, guys. In addition to that, I've seen dogs, like I've met multiple dogs, like especially working dogs, that would chew on rocks. So I don't know what makes you think they would not chew on a steel gun. Like, maybe their teeth aren't going to have as much impact on a steel gun, but it's still going to mess up your grips or something along those lines. You still don't want your steel frame gun in your dog's mouth. You don't want any gun in your dog's mouth. So, like, hey, be better about that in general. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where my gun was potentially going to get chewed by my dog. These guys are stuck in the past. They are unwilling to advance. They're unwilling to update. And that's like, you want to talk about stagnation? That's like the worst type of stagnation. Actively rejecting good products or good innovation because you didn't have it back in your day is ridiculous. It's the same type of idea of like being against optics on rifles or now pistols. Well, you should have to learn. Iron sights are the only thing you need. I wouldn't trust an optic and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that was a great sentiment 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when optics were still a fairly new thing and maybe weren't as durable. Today they are. Today they have great battery life. Today they are very resistant to impact and all that kind of stuff and just work. I am perfectly willing to still have backups because redundancy is important, but I'm still willing to trust those types of things in order to be able to have the performance advantage that they provide. Should you know how to shoot irons? Absolutely. Should you also be able to engage with an optic and preference doing so? Absolutely. And it's the same type of thing with Glocks. Should you even if it's just your utilitarian gun, it's a Glock 19 that you beat up on all the time and you carry and you throw on your floorboards of your truck and all that kind of stuff and stomp on it, but know it's going to work. And then fine, go ahead and have your fancy 1911 that is your go-to go-to-meeting type of gun or whatever it is that it may be, the thing that you bring out to wow your friends while the Glock 19 is stuck in the back of your closet waiting to be carried again. Whatever, man. Still hating a gun based off the fact that it's not made of steel or doesn't have these older production factors that allow the gun to be produced more cheaply and at a higher volume is kind of silly to me. It's very anti-progressive. It's really regressive, honestly. There's this constant movement, especially in the Second Amendment community, to reject any type of progress, and it just never made sense to me. It's just something I can't get behind. All right, guys, this has been a very long video, so let's go ahead and try to wrap this up here. Like I said, at the beginning, my statement was two-part, and we only really went into the first part, which is, when Glock showed up, nothing else was really like it. In my opinion, 100%, you cannot go wrong in the striker-fired, polymer-framed market. I have my preferences. There are things that I do and don't like. But if you come up to me and you're like, hey man, I just bought an XDS, I'd be like, that's cringe, but you know what, good for you. I hope that it works out really well for you. I hope that you feel like you got value for your dollar and that it's gonna meet the requirements that you have at the end of the day. Fantastic. Same thing if you bought a CZ, which I actually really like CZs, but that has nothing to do with this conversation. HK, it doesn't matter. Even if you go and buy a hammer-fired gun, I don't care. But in my opinion, for years, anytime I've been asked about striker, because they're popular, striker polymer framed handguns are popular. Anytime I've been asked about it, I've always responded that you cannot go wrong. But one thing that I would point out is that Glock created this market. All of these guns, all these striker fired polymer framed handguns that have come out since then have origins with the Glock. Now, does that make it better? No. But it does mean that maybe you throw a little bit of respect on its name when you talk about it. Because just like the 1911 more or less established the form factor for handguns moving into the 20th century, like nothing in the early development of semi-automatic handguns, no one really knew what design was going to win out. And a lot of guns looked like shrunk down rifles. Not the 1911. And that is the form factor that we carried forward. Thank you, John Moses Browning. Glock owes its lineage to the 1911 for that reason. And that's why, like, as much as I don't think 1911s are as viable as they were 50 years ago, I still treat the 1911 with a certain amount of respect because it did a lot for firearms development. John Moses Browning did a lot for firearms development, and so did Gaston Glock. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts in this particular video, or at least on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day. Might as well just polish off that last little bit,